Is he the one?
Yeah.
What's his name? Austin?
Yes.
Have you ever taken Professor Hardy?
No. No. Amy's taking him right now.
Oh, really?
Dr. Harvey.
You have him? For senior thesis? No, not
So he's really, really good.
Is he, you have him for senior thesis? Oh.
I don't see him anymore.
How is he? Is he?
He's good. He's very participative. Like, he wants you to know your reading and asks a lot of questions. He really focuses on building an argument. And so he'll, like, in class, he'll be like, okay, take a stance. And then he'll try to, like, bash your stance. And then go, well, what about this? What about that? And then, like, play devil's advocate and on the other side.
Is he a fair grader?
Yeah, he is.
He's not like, oh, you didn't dot that.
No, I've only had
minus.
one paper graded by him, but it was fine. Yeah. So.
He's doing. I just did.
Welcome once again to
Yeah.
History 3000, Section 2,
No, I did this in
French Revolution and Napoleon. This in somehow. I think I'm audible. Let me. Some of you were here that were not here last week, for one reason or another, and I have returned papers and spoke with them. That's good. I spoke about them at some length, but I won't repeat all of that. But I do want to hand you papers. Let's see, Caitlin. I revised yours upward since I read the final version rather than the rough draft. Be too bad if it went the other way, right? Yeah. No, but that was worth a revision upwards. See, Amy, here you are. There you go. Victor, here you are. You're welcome. Let's see, Allison, here you go. And let's see, Edmund. Now, wait a minute. I've got a... Hold on. I've got this. Yeah, here. Oh, there we go, Edmund. There you go. You're welcome. Now, is there anyone that turned in a paper that has not gotten a paper back? I think we're straight on the bookkeeping by now, right? I hope so. Okay. Hi there, Joe. No problem. No problem. There we go. Now, who still lacks a copy of the paper topic? That is the one that comes due next week. Yeah? Okay. This is on Blackboard. If you are missing one. There you go. Nice to have a copy. Okay. Anyone else? Everyone's straightened away with that assignment. We spoke about it a bit last time. I do want to run through the discussion of the book by rapport today in such a way that you may at least consider some topics, some ways to handle the paper assignment that is coming. I also thought that I would give each of you a copy of of two maps. Well, copies of two maps, I should say. The first one that is coming around, if you would take one and pass it along, please. Let's see. Here's the other one. Well, here's the map of Europe in 1805. That is, after Napoleon had changed the map according to his liking. And then if you, Dune, if you again would take one of these, this is the map of Europe in 1792. And I thought that we might compare the two. In fact, when we get to that in the discussion, what I would suggest that you do is lay the things out side by side in front of you to see what all Napoleon did with regard to a boundary here and a boundary there. Let me go through names, though, to make sure that I'm keeping tabs of who is here. So I've got Edmund, I just saw. Cameron, she may well show up in a little bit. But I've got Brian here. And John off campus, I think I have sent you a message, and so I'll look forward to hearing from you. Eric is here. Dylan is here. Dune is here. Andrea is here. Danielle said she could not be here. Rihanna said she could not be here. Fallon is here. Let's see, how about Cassidy? I don't see Cassidy offhand. Ryan is right there. Austin is there. Joe has come in. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Jennifer is not here. Allison is here. Let's see, Lindsay told me she would not be here. Victor is here. Amy is here. Caitlin is here. Dennis is here. Robert is not here, and I knew that Isabella Dow would not be here. Okay. Okay. Very good. With the historian, yes.
I know last time we didn't find a URL, but I was wondering if I brought in a thumb drive, is it saved to where they could load me up with class?
The URL, you mean for the broadcast class?
Yeah.
I have that on my email. Email me about. I don't know the answer to that question. I'd have to ask Angie, but. You found it. Yeah, it was you that I was mailing, right?
I found it too. I watched it because I missed last class, so it's
Okay.
uploaded and it's
Yeah,
like.
they uploaded a week after, so I think
Yeah.
last class was uploaded yesterday.
Oh, okay. Okay, that I didn't know. Okay, okay. So I don't know. If you want, we can ask Angie if you can do that. The thing is available online. Yeah, broadcast live helps only those who, in terms of television, only those who have Comcast.
UCCS EDU with a bunch of videos, but I didn't find it.
I think it's
It's
UCCS
web services.
Web services. I believe it's UCCS Web Services, one word. And then, that is, you go on YouTube, UCCS Web Services, one word, and then HIST3000.
Well, it should just be right there, because the only videos uploaded now is last.
Okay, I thought there were other videos. It's all kinds of things.
Past there are, but right now it's just these.
Okay, we're it.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
right now, 20 center.
Well, I'm sure that sounds like a guarantee of good Nielsen ratings. Okay. All right, okay. So, but if you, we can ask Angie, but if you want to email me, I'll just forward to you the same email that I forwarded to Ryan, and that you click it and there you are. Okay, okay. So with the historian Peter McPhee, we managed to carry our narrative of events up to 1799. In other words, through the period that is of the government known as the Directory. Today, we carry the story up into the dictatorship. The consulate, where Napoleon was the first consul, and to a brief period when he had the title of consul for life, and then on into the empire, where he proclaimed himself as Emperor of the French in 1804. Napoleon Bonaparte was, of course, a war hero. He was a popular general. He was the embodiment of the revolutionary principle of career open to talent. because he was a junior officer in 1789 when the revolution broke out. Because his family was of the minor nobility, he had very few prospects for an advancement despite talent in a military career. But of course the revolution dealt him a new deck of cards altogether, and he took advantage of that. The theme for today is, of course, warfare between 1792 and 1815. In other words, the Revolutionary and also the Napoleonic Wars. Hi there. Okay. Thank you. I can. Thank you. Now, you know these are due next week. Yeah, if you want to, okay. Well, I certainly won't reject the paper, but that's, okay. So we turn to the field of military history. And I would like to announce to all of you a law of nature that as a scientist I have uncovered. And that is 10% of all students in undergraduate courses at this level love military history and think that it is essential to the study of history. 90% hate military history and just wish it would go away. But it is essential. And that's why I assigned the book on the syllabus for today, The Napoleonic Wars by Mike Rapport. This is from the series put out by Oxford University Press called A Very Short Introduction. And it is a very short introduction, and I thought that for everyone in the class, but in particular for those who do not like to wade very far into the waters of military history, that this was just what the doctor ordered. And in that spirit, I assigned it. How, after all, would we speak about the Napoleonic era if we put the issue of warfare onto the shelf? How would we? Because it was characterized by warfare. Just to begin with, to open the discussion, something that struck you as remarkable or just worth comment about the book by Rapport. The way he writes, a point he made, a way that he frames the issue. What did you think? Yes?
Well, something I never really realized, I guess, reading Hackett. I like how he laid out that the Girondins, the Jacobins, and the king all went to war for different reasons, but they all agreed on going to war.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting that, I mean, it didn't work out for the king ultimately in the end. He was the biggest loser of them all.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how they all went to war just for different reasons, but they all went to war.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he does lay that out nicely. A confluence of motives behind the declaration in 1792. Anything else? Just anything that struck you about this book? Yes?
I had always thought that one of the results of the revolution in the Napoleonic era was the emergence of modern nationalism.
Yes.
He refutes that.
He refutes that. And as an old hand at German history in this era, I am a great friend of his refutation. But there's more to the story than that. There's more to the story than that. And in fact, in a few weeks and from an odd angle, we're going to reconsider that story, having to do with the way in which governments that Napoleon, in effect, created were able to come together in a national project, and that was the increasing the navigability of the Rhine River. But we'll talk about that later, yeah.
Like, I mean, everything I've had about Napoleon is the outgeneral the other generals, and his troops were better and better led. And this book is basically like, yeah, he just, if they ever met one-on-one with equal numbers, he got decimated just because he concentrated his forces in one narrow line. But his troops were less well-trained. The generals might have led better, but if they met one-on-one with the opposing force, they actually lost.
Okay, so there's a certain lifting of a mythic attitude toward Napoleon, yeah.
Did Hitler learn a lot of his battle styles from Napoleon? Because they seem very similar to the Blitzkrieg style.
He studied Napoleon with great interest.
Did he?
Absolutely. Anything else just in general about this book that just struck you one way or the other? Yes, Amy.
He delves into a lot of different aspects of war. Like, he doesn't just stay with the military strategy and the campaign and the narrative, but he actually digs into how the people were responding and the employment of total war and even how the soldiers were responding to the idea of war and how that changes from one period to the next.
By my observation, this would be a good example of the way that military history is written these days. It does not just focus on what the generals sought how to do, their strategy and their employment of tactics, but we get all of this. We get warfare as an event within a total society, within a total culture. And it's in that spirit, too, that we raise questions about whether the French provoked nationalism in Germany or anywhere else. Okay. Now, the plan, the rough plan that I have for today for our discussion is in view of the paper that you have assigned. You will remember that the paper that you have assigned deals with change or continuity owing to warfare in this period, 1792 to 1815. In fact, let me just read the statement of it, the one paragraph in which I actually put the question in the prompt that I gave you last week. Here it goes. From 1792 to 1815, the French waged war almost without pause. Considering Europe as a whole, and or referring to European aims and interests overseas, identify two fundamental ways in which warfare changed or led to change, and one fundamental way in which conditions that had existed before the revolution persisted through this span of time. Now, if you take the way warfare led to change, then all of a sudden you open up to yourself issues like the one Joe raised a moment ago. To what extent did warfare prod nationalism as a new passion in Europe? Or to what extent did Europeans outside France tend to think of their identity in much the way they had before, in some way pre-nationalistically? Okay? So you can really, the observation from Amy is well taken, and you can really use the whole book to conceive of your paper, the whole book. I wanted today to lead you into some specific issues, but you can use the whole book. First, these maps. There you go. Put on your left, if you would, the map of Europe in 1792. Now, this is the point at which war begins. And on your right, the map of, I'm sorry. I didn't think to hand you one there, Cameron. And you're right, the map of Europe in 1805. In other words, early in the empire, but after the French armies had moved from victory to victory into the imperial period, and the way in which Napoleon determined that the boundaries of Europe should be redrawn. Let's just go across here point by point. Great Britain is, of course, the island there that you see in the upper left, particularly the map of 1792. It is an island power. It maintains the greatest empire in 1792, but we're given to understand that others, and in particular France, had wanted to contest that role, and throughout the 18th century. France, as you can see, is in Western Europe, just below. As you turn your attention due east, in other words, to the right from France, what do you see? Aside from an advertisement for liverwurst. Yes, go ahead.
Poland in 1792 is almost as large as France. By 1805, it's been reduced considerably.
Right, and between 1792 or 1793, I should say, and 1805 or 1807, it altogether goes out of existence. This owing to the partitions of Poland by Prussia, Russia, and Austria. But we will come to that in due time. As you go east from France, in the map of 1792, you see an extraordinary patchwork, except that most patchwork is in a design much more clear than the one that presents itself to you there. Just up the coast of the North Sea from France, you would see the Austrian Netherlands. That's not too clearly printed there, but it's there. And beyond that, you would see the Netherlands. All right? Today, the Netherlands then, the Netherlands today. But to the east of that, you see this, this extraordinary variety of shapes and sizes. What is that? Yes?
Was it the German states?
Yes, this is the German states. 300 plus of them. Some of them of some size. Look at Prussia, for example. As you train your eye to the right, in other words, go east in Europe, and there you see Prussia. It is at least of size enough to have its name put on the map. But if your eye is very good, you will see that there are some territories in the same color that stretch out across northern, what today we call Germany, to the west, and that's because the Prussian dynasty has had immense success for the past 2 centuries at adding territories to itself, some of which are not contiguous to the Prussian homeland. And if you really want to pass your oral examination in graduate school, you will notice that that there is a borderline between Prussia to the east and what is then labeled as East Prussia. And the sense of that is that Prussia actually established its monarchy to the east of the lands that we call Prussia. The original country that came to be called Prussia was actually called Brandenburg. Brandenburg, all right? So it is all very complicated. Let me tell you what one of my favorite students of all time said to me right after I had taught a course on this subject. She raised her hand, she said, I thought you did a great job with a subject that is basically boring. She didn't realize that was a backhanded compliment because, of course, I think it's interesting. But you can imagine why people throw up their hands in despair over the history of Germany in the 18th century, because there is no such thing. There are 300 plus German states, and if you add to that the imperial knighthoods, you have 300 states with overlapping, with plus about 1,200 knightly territories that have overlapping sovereignties one with another, all with their own currency, all with their own foreign policy, all with their own system of weights and measures, at least potentially. And my word, is it complex. My word, is it complex. But that was the situation in Europe in 1792. The whole thing, marked out in those black borders, the whole thing is called the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Not holy, not Roman, marginally German. And if I may, which is the state that is uppermost there, that has nominal dominance, even if it has very little influence upon every one of these 300 plus sovereignties? Which is the state in the 1792 map? Not Bavaria. Not Bohemia, but you can see between Bavaria and Bohemia, in maddeningly small print, which strikes me as a flaw in the map, you can see Austria. You see it? That's Austria. And Austria has for, look, Erica, the squiggledy line.
I forgot my glasses.
Oh. Okay.
I'll have to look at it.
Are you going to take what I say on faith? Okay. Okay. The squiggledy line is the Danube River, and it runs through Vienna, the capital of Austria. And since the 15th century, the Austrian dynasty has supplied the throne to the Holy Roman Empire. By the way, what's the name of the dynasty? Anyone know? Okay, the Habsburg dynasty. And they, their archdukes are at the same time emperors of all that variety in Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. But, of course, one power from amid those of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, has emerged in the 18th century to challenge Austria for dominance, military dominance. And what power is that? Prussia, this power to the north, whose confusion I tried to describe a moment ago. I mean, this will really develop in the 19th century as it becomes a kind of war of the Titans for control of the German states between Austria and Prussia. But it already looms. It already looms. Yes?
Create a rabbit trail, but I had read some places that the history of the Prussian people was that they were very conservative and resisted modernity.
Yes, yes, you can read that in many places. But in the 19th century, Prussia really leads the way toward economic modernization. For example, in 1834, and this really is a step toward the German nation, or the establishment of the German nation, the Prussians established what was called the Zollverein, which means the Customs League, and included in it the German states minus Austria. I mean, this was a mark in the 19th century of a Prussian intention to come to dominance. And when Germany finally did unify in 1871, it unified under Prussian leadership and to the exclusion of Austria.
What was the heritage of Otto?
Von Bismarck?
Yeah.
Otto von Bismarck-Schönhausen. He was the minister-president of Prussia, then the chancellor of, I mean, he's not the monarch. He was the chancellor of the new empire in 1871. And let's see, where did he come from? I think from Pomerania, which is a province too small really to be named on your map. I'd have to check that if it's Pomerania, Mecklenburg, or conceivably East Prussia. I'd have to check where he was from. Okay. So, are you with me? Are you with me? Yeah. Do you understand now that if you at all can, you need to avoid 18th century German history? Okay. Yeah.
I have a question about if the Holy Roman Empire were just split up into all these other states, how is there a Holy Roman Emperor if it's all split up into, it's not really one unit?
Well, I mean, he certainly had symbolic authority, and he had the ability to influence the smaller powers. If anything, by the 18th century, the Holy Roman Empire did not field its own army. Austria fielded its army. The Holy Roman Empire did not mint its own coinage. Austria minted its own coinage. If anything, the Holy Roman Emperor, by the 18th century, was there to adjudicate differences among the member states of the Holy Roman Empire, and it often set itself up as the protector of the small states as against large and rapacious ones like Prussia or Saxony. It is an empire in a very loose sense of the term, but to think your way back into the 18th century, at least on the continent of Europe, you have these more or less unified monarchies to the west, Spain, France, Britain, although of course, there are regional peculiarities that have to be borne in mind if you really study those subjects. But in Central Europe, you have division, not a unified monarchy, nothing that really looks as though it would anticipate a nation state at all. Frederick the Great ruled in Prussia from 1740 to 1786. He is, in a way, the central monarch, the monarch that people study the most of all these German states. And he was very interested in the Enlightenment. For example, invited French philosophers like Voltaire to his court at Sanssouci in Potsdam, just outside of Berlin. And the thought that German, for example, could be used for the writing of literature struck him as hilarious and made him laugh. So the idea, I mean, if you want to start talking about German nationhood in the 18th century, you can make some halting attempts in that direction. It's not as though nothing whatsoever in Germany anticipates this later nation state. And this is the hardest thing to get across. the hardest thing to get across because, of course, the myth is, well, the Germans were always fanatics. This goes all the way back to the days of the Roman Empire. Those people were goose-stepping around Germany since then. They were not. They were not. They had very little idea of themselves as a unity. I mean, most Germans had the idea that they belonged to something called the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. But they had a firmer idea that they were subjects of the Archbishopric of Cologne, the Duchy of Bavaria, the Kingdom of Saxony, or something like that. Prussia. Although even there, as you saw, as Prussia began to expand its territories, it couldn't just snap its fingers and insist upon Prussian loyalty. I think I told you about that famous for me conversation that I had with a man in the Rhineland. Oh, now, gosh, when would that have been? 25 years, 30, 45 years ago. I don't know when it was, a long time ago. But I said to him, when do you think people in this part, because Prussia gradually extended its control into the Rhineland, and in fact, after Napoleon became the power in the northern Rhineland. I said, when do you think the people here became really Prussian in their outlook, in their orientation? He said, 1914, of course. In other words, the outbreak of the First World War. I think it went back somewhat before that, but not too far before that. It wasn't a bad answer. Anyway, I think there was a hand here, yeah.
Yeah, I have a quick question about the idea of nationhood. So, like, this was the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. Well, they didn't necessarily use the word nation in the way that we would think.
No, not as we would think about it.
Okay.
Absolutely not. There was no presumption of common language.
Okay.
There was no presumption of common culture. After the Reformation, there was truly no presumption of common religion because there were, of course, Lutherans and Catholics. Yes?
Was there a language called German before there was a German?
Well, I mean, Martin Luther did a good part within Protestant regions of Germany to spread his Saxon dialect, but to Protestants because he translated the Bible, and he also issued I don't know how many pamphlets in promotion of the Protestant Reformation. I mean, that was a major step forward toward standardization of German. But then, of course, in the 17th century, Germany was racked by the 30 Years' War, and really there was, of all things, a decline in literacy throughout the 17th century, and it's not really until the 18th century that Germany begins to emerge again with a literary language, that is, literary authors. Authors you probably have never heard of, like Klopstock and Lessing. And they moved in the direction of a literary language with a basis in central Germany. But of course, most peasants were illiterate, even if they lived in a state where on the books there were rules of universal primary education. Most peasants were illiterate, and certainly were not reading plays or philosophical works by Wieland or Klopstock or Gottsched or Lessing or other authors of that time.
So whatever they're speaking, they might not call that German.
Yeah. And they certainly would not be able to understand one another. But that goes down unto the present day. I mean, I think that's less and less in the younger generation. But the older generation, people older than I am, if you can imagine that, people older than I am often speak among, that is, unless they live in a city, they often speak among themselves in Bavarian or some kind of local regional dialect, and then but have High German, you know, if they need it. Yes.
Their loyalty to their church or their religion, whether they were Catholic or Protestant, have been more than the state at that time?
Pardon me, the last I didn't hear?
More important to religion than it was to the state?
Altogether. It was certainly more important than their relationship to the empire. After the Protestant Reformation, the so-called Peace of Augsburg in 1555 designated that as the prince believes, so believe the people. I can think of exceptions to that. as the prince believes, so believe the people. And that meant that for the most part, there was the identification of the prince, whoever the sovereign was, whether he was an archbishop or a duke or a margrave or a count or whatever he was, with religion, and people simply had to toe the line with that religion. And to some extent, people moved from place to place in order to be in accordance with the religion. But to some extent, because this was early modern Europe, they saw no need for it because they knew there was poor enforcement and just stayed put. Yeah.
The mishmash of the map on 1792,
Yes.
say that's the legacy of medieval.
Yes. Yes. Unclear sovereignties, porous borders. I mean, look at that. It's not even necessarily all German. Bohemia, for example. Well, that's now the Czech Republic, and people who spoke some ancestor of modern Czech lived there too. Along all of these borders, there was confusion. Anyone who, well, I think this is still the case. It certainly was the case when I was in graduate school and doing research in Germany. Anyone who eased across the border of southwestern Germany into northeastern France would hear German, even after 1945. Even after people who were French citizens had every reason to want to deny the German language, you could still hear German. I mean, the mixture of people who spoke Danish with people who spoke German there toward the peninsula up toward Denmark, that's legendary. And I can say from personal experience, and I would project this back into the 17th century, although I was only born in the 18th century, that the dialect that they speak along what is now the border between the Rhineland and the Netherlands, there's no difference. It's a kind of Netherlands, Dutch, German that the people speak. And just because Napoleon issued an edict that the border between the two was a cannon shot away from the Meuse River, that meant nothing. That meant nothing. So it really is quite a puzzle. But I'm not going to give you a pop quiz, so you can relax. It really is quite a puzzle. It's fun. It's a fun period to teach. Why is it so much fun? Why is it fun? Why do I enjoy it so much? I mean, I certainly could not stand here and name for you off the top of my head all of the 340 or so sovereignties.
How many could you get?
Hmm?
How many could you get?
Well, I can certainly get the electorships. I can get to the archbishoprics of Mainz, Trier, Cologne. Wait a second. Hold on. Brandenburg, in other words, Prussia, Saxony. Hold on now. The Palatinate, in other words, Die Pfalz, which is in western Germany, and Bavaria. There you go. That's good enough. But there were free cities like Bremen and Frankfurt. There were small territories. I mean, in the 19th century, people spoke repeatedly of die Nassauer, those from Nassau. There were several, yeah.
And how was like the immigration between these states? Like, was it open borders among all the states, or did they?
Well, I mean, you could certainly immigrate for lack of any force to prevent it. In the 18th century, and this I think may interest you, there were actually, you see, the Enlightenment is coming to all of these states, and it's very much like when we read Tackett, and he pointed out that not every Catholic in 18th century France was against the Enlightenment. There was a Catholic Enlightenment. But there was also, it's not the case that every ruler in 18th century Germany was against the Enlightenment either. And one tenet that particularly the Prussians picked up was the prize goes to the state with the greatest and most industrious population. Prussian agents fanned through southern Germany to advertise for migrants who would come to Prussian lands. Prussia, although, you know, in theory, everyone there was Protestant. Well, in theory, everyone there was Calvinist, because that's what the regime was. But in fact, Prussia had plenty of Catholic provinces, and often Catholics from the south were channeled to Catholic provinces such as Silesia. Or, you know, I'm not sure whether they came to the west. I'm just not sure of that. There's certainly a Catholic area, although with plenty of Protestants. I'm just not sure. But in any case, they went to Silesia. This was a pro-population policy on the part of the Prussian state. And then, of course, it wasn't just a matter of seeing if you could cross the border. It was a matter of being encouraged to cross the border and finding when you got there some form of accommodation for you, tools for a trade or a farm, and you know, a village and Prussian officials, often in a bad humor, ready to welcome you. Yeah.
Even today, though, at least my experience in the Eifel region.
Yeah, there we go.
People live in their villages.
Okay.
They don't move around the way we do.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to go down to Munich or Garmisch on weekends, and it just blew the Germans' minds away, the people that I knew.
Yeah, yeah.
Traveled that far for just a couple of days.
Yeah. I mean, people, yeah, I mean, that still remains by my experience. I know when I lived in Munich among students, my nickname among them was Die Fliege, which means the fly, because I was always all over the place. I said, what's he doing? Where is he? Yeah, but people live in regions. I mean, I think, you know, with the young generation, that younger generations that begins to break up, but people do live in regions. Villages even. It's quite remarkable. Quite remarkable. Anything else to say about this map? Let's see the one of 1792. Well, one thing to say is, in the same way that some of Prussia's key territory was outside of the Holy Roman Empire, now get this, much of Austria's key territory was also outside of the Holy Roman Empire. Hungary, for example. Yes. Oh, I thought that was a hand. The Austrians are supplied the royal throne of Hungary and have since the early part of the 16th century. The Austrians are also, they supply the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, but Hungary is not part of it. In fact, in the 19th century, if you find the designation imperial and royal majesty, Kaiserliche und Königliche Hoheit, Highness. That's a reference to the idea that the emperor is at the same time the king in Hungary, because of a dualism that became even more articulate in the 19th century after 1876 than it was in the 18th. And you look down, I mean, Transylvania is now part of Romania. Austrian power stretched and stretched and stretched, but the Austrians didn't live there. So, anyway, and poor Erica hasn't brought her glasses, so this is even more of a puzzle. Yes. I mean, that was the way, or through, and I think your author brings out this, when there's a treaty, there's always all right, now what do I get? Oh, the Duchy of Kleve. Oh. And that was Prussia's in 1609. Really, it is an interesting subject. I've got to get back to teaching that. I spent too much time with the Nazis. I'm becoming convinced. It's wearing me down. I'll rejuvenate myself with 18th century Prussia. No films, though. Anyway. Yeah, well, there you go. Well, I mean, as with Germany, so in less dramatic fashion with Italy. I mean, Italy was also divided among various sovereignties. And the idea of an Italian nation state still awaited. One of the interesting things about Germany is that I think the idea of nationhood developed there in two matrices that you would not expect. One is literature. That is, if you ask me who were the Germans in 1750 or 1760 or 1770, I would say, well, they're the ones who consumed German literature. And a literary public began to form in Germany among educated people, such as state officials, that really reached across these various borders. I would also say Pietism, which is a Protestant movement in the 18th century, and which also developed ties across regional boundaries, and also developed, I think, interest in enlightened literature and philosophy. And I would say in those two settings, which have nothing to do with the exercise of power, none of them commanded any armies, I would say that's where Germany began. Now, getting back to our subject. By the way, what was our subject? Our subject was Napoleon, right? And when Napoleon came on the scene, let's say as first consul in 1799, the French armies had already had so much success in the war to the east, to their east, that what had been called the Austrian Netherlands is now called Belgium, became French. The Netherlands had been turned into a sister republic called the Batavian Republic, and Switzerland had been turned into a sister republic also, called the Helvetian Republic. All right. And Germany, west of the Rhine, the western, where I lived part of the time I lived there, in western Germany, that had been divided up into French departments and had French prefects in charge of them. All right? So Napoleon already had, as it were, a bridgehead and something more but he did not have a bridgehead over the Rhine, but he had a bridgehead and something more in western Germany. So let's say the western part of Germany had already been converted toward France. Why did that mess bother him? And what did he do about that mess? Now look to from the 1792 map to the 1805 map. What's new? Confederation of the Rhine, der Rheinbund. Okay. And what was the Confederation of the Rhine? German states, satellite states, all of them bound to Napoleon in alliance. Napoleon had taken these small sovereignties beginning in 1803 and melded them together under middle-sized rulers. I mean, this is the time, for example, when Baden and Württemberg, states like that, the Palatinate, began to enlarge their territories at the expense of minor sovereignties, which made things much more rational, calculations much more performable for Napoleon. All he had to do was convene the Confederation of the Rhine and impose whatever policy he wanted to impose upon them. Such as what? What did Napoleon want out of these people? Okay, taxation, soldiers. Okay, taxation and soldiers. And in return, what did these people get in Western Germany under French authority or in Central Germany under French domination? What did people get? The French did not bring nothing. What did they get?
Did they?
Well, security, except when wars are going on over their heads.
I mean, he instituted the Napoleonic Code.
The Napoleonic Code.
Changed the legal system.
Okay, changed the legal system. And why would that be to an advantage? Look back to the French Revolution in 1789. One of the first changes is to change the system of courts and therefore the system of administration of law. I mean, often before there was any law, any new law to administer. Why did the French regard that as an advantage? I mean, think back to that and see if there's an analogy with Germans under French rule, yes.
I mean, they got representation in a new way. They had a new relationship to the state, and perhaps.
Okay. How about with regard to law? You have a quarrel with your neighbor about a boundary line.
Well, you have somebody new to go to.
Okay, okay.
Universal law now, I guess.
Universal law. Universal law. To begin with, a court.
Continuity.
Continuity, yes.
Isn't that where they finally got the Rhine under control because they could establish who was going to control what land?
Yeah.
They could cooperate.
Yeah. I mean, if you want a headache, imagine the negotiations that would have had to take place when there were dozens and dozens and dozens of sovereignties that asserted their authority over the control of one part of the Rhine or another. But if you had 5 or 6, you could, straighten the thing from its origins near Constance all the way up to Dusseldorf and beyond.
Bless you.
Yeah, bless you. So, yeah, there's a great advantage for Napoleon. I mean, and of course he was interested in good waterways because this was now a French river, so to speak, and he needed it for commerce. And if he wanted troops, well, it was easier to effect his will in a few sovereignties than in dozens. If he wanted taxes, it was easier to oversee the whole thing. It was easier to oversee the whole thing. And of course, a German manufacturer could find that to advantage. I mean, all of a sudden, the internal market of all of France lay at his disposal. There were certainly Germans on either side of the Rhine, whether they were in the new enlarged France or whether they were simply in this system of the Confederation that was under French dominance. There were Germans who were able to profit from aspect to this new continent-wide economy that Napoleon established. And again, as with Germany, so with Italy, it too simplifies considerably. In 1805, he sets up a Kingdom of Italy, establishes sovereignty actually over the Papal States in central Italy, and a Kingdom of Naples. And all of a sudden, the whole thing is much more simple and therefore much more susceptible to imperial control. Okay, so let's leave the maps aside. And you can make a mental note never to take a course on 18th century Germany if I offer one, okay? Let's think about the book here that we have from Mike Report, The Napoleonic Wars. Turn with me, please, to page 11. And I'd like your explanation of something there that he writes, by which he really begins to organize his entire topic. This is the bottom of that long paragraph. He says, symptomatic of the unforgiving nature of European diplomatic relations was the way in which 4 long-term smoldering problems fused into the final meltdown of the 18th century political system, the French Wars of 1792 to 1815. By the way, before we even look at what those 4 problems were, how does that strike your interest, since what you're going to write about next week has to do with what changed and what stayed the same? Four long-term smoldering problems fused into the final meltdown into the French Wars of 1792 to 1815. Yes,
I
Dune.
feel like if it's a meltdown, then there would be something changing because
Okay.
this situation that it
Okay.
currently is not strong enough to stay
Okay.
stay the way it is.
Okay, if there's a meltdown, there was something changing. If there was a fuse leading into the meltdown, there was, how would you go with that one, Dune? If there's a fuse leading into the meltdown, then,
Something that happened that made it change that way. Or
Okay.
That tipped it over.
okay, so you have it, and he's using a metaphor here, but the metaphor points you in both directions that you're asked to consider as you think about this paper topic. Was Napoleon maybe only the agent of developments that began well before him? I mean, that would be an extreme position. Did he add his own? What did he add? I mean, then you're on the terrain of this paper topic. Let's look at this now. These issues were France's dual concern for continental security and global power. Okay, explain that to me, someone. Explain that to me. How about you, Amy? What's that mean?
So, so French continental security, I mean, they are seeing kind of a breakup of different states, like Poland is getting partitioned off slowly and things like that.
Okay, and Poland's been an ally.
Yeah,
that hurts.
It has.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have like the Russian Empire. That's actually one of the next ones. But I mean, there's an idea that France's borders or France's control needs to be solidified.
Yeah.
So
okay.
security, in that sense, on the continent.
Okay.
And then a thirst for global power is continuing this imperial, trajectory.
Yeah. I mean, France is an unusual power in that way. And the revolution has done nothing to change it. And that is, France wants to be the dominant power on the continent at the same time that it wants to be a rival to whom overseas? The island power, Great Britain. And that's unusual. I mean, Prussia is not in an analogous situation. Austria is not in an analogous situation. That is, they are distinctly continental powers. If Russia has imperial interests, they run in a different direction across the globe than the French ones do. Russia, for example, is not, I mean, Russia has Pacific interests. It doesn't have Atlantic interests. So the situation for France is secure ourselves on the continent, challenge the British for dominance overseas. But of course, that hasn't gone well. Who won and who lost what we call the French and Indian War, but what there is called the 7 Years' War?
France lost.
England won. France lost. Okay. Okay. France lost Canada. And so the trouble has been upon the French really throughout the 18th century to deal with the fact that the English have just used many things, but among other things, their status as an island power to control the globe. And France is more and more aware that the future lies to the one that controls the globe. But being on the continent, they can hardly just open themselves to invasion from continental powers, continental rivals. Let's look on. The rivalry between Prussia and Austria in Germany. Someone explain that to me. Someone explain the rivalry between Prussia and Austria in Germany. Who can tell me something about that? Brian.
Austria is, as you said, typically always had the control because of the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah.
But Prussia is like, we're stronger now. We're adding more territory. We're expanding.
Right.
So because they're military might, they're trying to take over the leadership role. They don't really just hold it because you've always had it. So they're challenging that condition.
Right. I mean, here is a distinct challenge to the Austrian dominance of Germany. Here, read the Holy Roman Empire. A distinct challenge. And it's already come to force of arms. Prussia stood with England in the 7 Years' War. Austria, and this diplomatic historians call this the, quote, diplomatic revolution, because the diplomacy of this was so unprecedented. Austria sided with France. Prussia has snatched the important Austrian territory of Silesia, and with a lot of Catholics in 1740. So, I mean, this is not a conflict that historians of the 19th century have imposed back or presumed existed in the 18th. It's already there in the 18th century, already there. The friction between, oh, I'm sorry, I missed the emergence of Russia. Tell me now something about that. First of all, what kind of a state is Russia?
Complete autocratic monarchy.
Okay, complete autocratic monarchy. And who has been the complete autocratic monarch up to 1796? Anyone know?
It wasn't Catherine.
Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great. And Russia has seen a modernization and certainly a penchant for aggression in her imperial policy, some of which has pushed into Europe, some of which has expanded into southern Asia or east in Asia. Now, who has been the victim in Europe of Russian imperialism west as Russia tries to become a bigger figure in Europe? Yes? Okay. Well, I mean, Britain views this all with concern. Where? Okay. India. And that certainly is right. I mean, that points us in the direction of South Asia. But what in the 19th century was called the Great Game between Britain and Russia for control over southern Asia, that really has already begun in the 18th century. How about Russia's interests west, due west? Who has suffered? Yes?
Poland.
Poland, exactly. There have been 3 partitions of Poland. 1772, 1793, 1795, and Russia has taken part in every one of them, along with Prussia and Austria, until in the end there is no independent Poland. Yes?
Poland always seems to be like the punching bag of Europe. Do they not
Yes.
like, have an army, or what's up with them?
Well, they
There's
did.
poor strategic
They
position.
did, but
They had an empire at one time.
yes, yes. The thing about the 18th century is, I mean, if this were a course in monarchy in the 18th century, we would come to the idea that Frederick the Great was an enlightened monarch, Catherine the Great was an enlightened monarch, Joseph II of Austria, an enlightened monarch, and that sounds as though what they represent is an openness to the new philosophy, an openness to the new science, and all of that is true. It also means that they look for ways to develop their states in such a way that their states can support larger and ever larger armies. And that is true of no state more than Prussia. Now, Poland maintained a tradition of, let's say, regional noble power, and as such was in no position to marshal national Polish resources that could match those of any of those 3 rivals that encircled her. And that just spelled doom. That just spelled doom. And it runs through the history of 1795, when Poland went altogether out of existence, up to 1807, when Napoleon created a duchy of Warsaw that again became, yet another French satellite state, and also a stepping stone for his attack 4 years later, 5 years later, into Russia. But that goes all the way up to 1919. All the way to 1919. There was no Polish state. There were occasional Polish uprisings and insurrections, 1831, 1848, 1863. The Poles rose up against, in particular, the Russians. But they had no state. And then, of course, the Nazis made quick work of the Prussian state in September of 1939. The Soviets came in from the east. 1939 to 1945, no Prussian state. Then a Prussian state, but in effect a puppet regime of the client state, puppet regime, call it what you will, underneath the Soviet imperium. Poland, yeah, what did I say? Oh, no, yeah, well, that'd be its own story. East Prussia became part of Russia. West Prussia became part of Poland. To the west of that, what used to be called Prussia became East Germany, in large part. So, I mean, the Poles just lost. But they lost because of this, they maintained a tradition of noble regional authority to which they were very tied, but that spelled doom in terms of this. You get this idea that the 18th century, they may have been full of philosophical writers like Voltaire and Rousseau, who seemed to point toward a better future, but the monarchs of this period, the governments of this period, were locked in tremendous rivalry, and doom goes to the loser, and that was Poland. Okay, so then was there one more? Yeah, the maritime empires, particularly France and Britain, that really specifies the first of those points. Now, the French Revolution, 1792, this is the situation. The initial impulse on the part of the French is to proclaim liberty and justice as international principles and let it go at that. Why should we go to war with anyone? But by 1792, you saw it, friction had developed between the French and these traditional French rivals, Austria and Prussia. And by 1792, they were at war. And you saw it as well that the French, perhaps to the surprise of most of the French, had more success at this than you would think that a new state would, and was able to push into Austrian and Prussian territory in Germany, which really threw down the gauntlet for, well, what would it be, 23 years of warfare that began over contested territories in Western Germany and in the Low Countries, but that, of course, would spread all the way into Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe. Okay. Yeah. What I'm interested in here is, what did Napoleon bring to all this? I mean, the way we're telling this story, Napoleon is just a kind of replacement for Louis XVI, who in turn had been a replacement for Louis XV. And French kings just did what French kings did, and Napoleon came along, and they didn't call him a king, but same thing. The Germans would say, dasselbe in grün, the same thing in green. But what did Napoleon add to this? What is the Napoleonic ingredient, if there is one? I mean, you might look at all this and say, I don't see change at all. A change of government, but in terms of warfare, international relations, I see nothing. Napoleon just continued where the others left off. What do you say? What does Napoleon bring that is Napoleonic?
I mean, he provides a clear leadership in a way that rallies people. So, like, something I remember from the book that kind of stuck with me is just this idea of, like, the soldiers feeling like, oh, we're under Napoleon. Oh, we've got to channel this kind of, lightning strike, whatever, tactics.
Yeah.
And
well, now we're getting someplace.
Yeah. It gave the soldiers a lot of confidence. It gave them a new kind of way of looking at this leader.
So I mean, you really open the territory to talk about how he changed warfare. Yes.
When you're talking about like the Napoleonic Code, even after he started to break up the states, supplying him soldiers and kind of rebelled, they're like, hey, you're kind of, we don't want you, but you know what? This order you brought, this is nice, kind of like Alexander the Great after he swept through.
Okay.
The areas you conquered are like, okay, you no longer conquered us. But kind of like the code and the structure, the trade routes and stuff you brought us.
Yeah.
The Napoleonic Code lived on.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, the French system is transplanted to all areas that Napoleon annexes. And look at that map from 1805. I mean, he goes all the way up the coast through the Low Countries, all the way up the northern coast of Germany. And that's all French. So the Code Napoleon, the access to French markets, all of that is there. And I know from the Rhineland, which I worked on in research years and years ago, I know from the Rhineland that no sooner did the empire withdraw than the new Rhineland territories, I mean left bank of the Rhine, that fell to the sovereignty of Prussia, began to agitate in favor of the maintenance of the Prussian, or excuse me, of the French municipal code, because it empowered city leaders and town leaders to constitute local government without the interference of rural nobility. And they wanted that. They wanted that throughout the 19th century. There were few tears shed over Napoleon, but they wanted some of the advantages that Napoleon had brought. A code, equality before the law, trial by jury, justices of the peace. I mean, all of that all of that left its imprint wherever the French planted their flag, but also wherever the French just established their dominance and set up a pattern for imitation. And all of that. So, yeah, and he also taxed people and forced their men to go to war. That became less and less popular over time. Occupation armies, that was not popular. But still. Okay. Well, let's take, yeah, go ahead, Victor.
His capability led to an air of invincibility.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, he certainly thinks of himself as invincible. And Victor's comment really gets the idea of what kind of a man Napoleon was. What kind of a man was he?
Charismatic.
Okay, charismatic. I mean, he certainly, he certainly left his imprint as a person upon Europe. Soldiers would, warm to him. Okay, appetite for conquest. Your author says an opportunist, too. Every place he saw an advantage, he took it. And that's what Napoleon brings to a scale that Louis XVI had never thought of, or Louis XV, Louis XIV. I mean, Napoleon, it's like these tendencies existed before Napoleon. He just pushed them further. Now let's take 10 minutes, and when we come back, let's speak about this whole issue of warfare that Amy raised for us. One question being, how different is let's say the emotional involvement of the soldier, the individual soldier in a Napoleonic army, as opposed to what existed beforehand? Okay. What do I got here? Chair.
Where did you go?
Study, but of the reading I've done, I consider him one of the people most responsible for setting Europe up for the world wars.
Okay.
Yeah, like
His desire for conquest left the impressions and the alliances in place that caused World War I and, of course, World War II directly.
Okay.
Which is not bad though, because
Okay. Yeah.
you'll probably get at least a good
Yeah.
job.
I brain-farted really hard.
Okay.
What I ended up doing is I took the last paper and I revised it based on your notes. And I was like, oh, I'll turn this in this way.
Oh, so you-
started looking at any of those.
all right. Well, maybe that was a good exercise. We
Like,
don't
not a
know.
single one.
No, me neither. And I don't.
There needs to be an extra day of the week for me to just do all of them.
An extra day of the week.
Let's get the old French Revolution.
I don't know what came through me, but like, oh, I'm supposed to do corrections and print it next week, so that's why I brought this. Oh. Yeah, like it was like a revision or something. Yeah, I don't know how that idea got into my head. That's funny. It's just stupid.
Okay, that sounds like a good approach.
still feel like I'm a little bit.
Technical stuff, and I'm like, yeah, that's great. Like, and I'm just like, what? And his friend Richard was really he's like, close that door, and I'm like, Richard, that door, it'll close by itself. And he's like, close the door. Oh my god, I was she's probably working.
That's funny.
Excuse me? Just like what? You can play when they're a geese all you might step in or something like that, and then just like right, hello. Like oh, okay. He's like just kind of by the other people. Oh, oh, what was I feel more behind him. At least it's or the ordinary one. Oh yeah, did you take that? Since you I was supposed to, but I get the like you get one freebie, and I was like, you know what, I just can't. I got my paper written. That was like the one thing I did, and I was able to
Finish it on Thursday. Yeah, well, yeah, I just turned it in via email. But yeah, it was. Yeah, I was just like, I can't do the weekly research official. I didn't finish the book. I can't. It was just. But I get the one. It is. I know. I feel like the class we have.
We have one on Chinese history.
Okay, once again. Now, make sure that I'm on. There we go. Paper topic does not insist that you deal with the military in regard to this period. The revolution. Sorry. But you might do that. It certainly is available. And Amy raised the question, well, what about this idea that the French army was more filled with an enthusiasm for an ideological cause, the cause of nationalism, let us say, than the soldiers of other armies? I mean, that's an idea to explore, but I will point out to you something, and that is that from pages 56 to 73 of the book, Chapter 4, Total War, Revolutionary War, you get from your author a slew of changes that have to do with warfare per se, whether these are tactics or recruitment or this issue of the spirit of the soldier. That entire chapter is full of that. Moreover, that chapter also really raises the question of, well, what is new in what Napoleon, in the way in which Napoleon, or before him, the way in which the revolutionary generals conducted war. I mean, just to kind of give you a quick overview, let me just kind of run topic sentence to topic sentence, because the topic sentence has put, as the words implies, topics before you. The levée en masse, that's the mass conscription, not only conscripted men into the army, but also explicitly mobilized all the resources of the country. That's bottom of 57. Next paragraph, popular mobilization extended into the army. That gets into this whole question of ideological fervor. The next paragraph, yet the question how far the rank and file was actually driven by ideological fervor is an open one, not least because motivation is intangible and so hard to measure. All right, so maybe you're on safe ground to argue that, but maybe there's some kind of qualification that needs to be added. I go on. Yet these were the years of the terror when French soldiers and civilians were bombarded with Republican propaganda, repeatedly warned of the dire counter-revolutionary consequences of defeat. So maybe your argument about ideological fervor works better early in our period as opposed to late in our period. Maybe another kind of motivation takes effect later. I noticed middle of page 60. I mean, here's an interesting caveat that ought to be considered. These were, after all, 23 years in which wave of young men after wave of young men after wave of young men entered the French army. By the way, not all of them French, as France expanded its area of influence eastward. But revolutionary nationalism may have shriveled as many French soldiers became seasoned veterans and developed a professional ethos. Their loyalties shifted more to the army itself, and so forth. So that gets to the idea that maybe there's an early change toward ideological fervor, but this change toward ideological fervor itself undergoes a change toward something else as our period rolls along. Then one source of France's military strength may have lain in tactics, organization, and logistics. Well, there you go. You're on to another subject that you might want to drag into your paper. Now, here's something I'm going to that interests me. The tactic that's coming. Well, let's see. This has to do with the way in which the armies would march along by division, fanned out over a very broad area and live off the land as they went. That this was a different means in the organization of the movement of an army, all right? But look at the very bottom of the page. 60. Adopting the ideas of Pierre de Bourset, a French staff officer who experimented with the deployment of independent columns in mountain warfare. His conclusions in 1775, the army was redeployed into So, what may have been remarkable in practice had been presaged in idea well before the French Revolution even began. And that can weigh on your thinking a little bit of this question. And I go on, once onto the battlefield, the armies of the French Revolution put other old regime ideas into practice. For one, the French made skillful use of light infantry, chasseurs, which means, in fact, hunters, deployed as skirmishers, sent out in small detachments and so forth. So there's a tactic to bear in mind. French used artillery flexibly, bombarded enemy lines prior to the battle, but also used lighter guns introduced by the old regime expert Jean-Baptiste de Gribeauval, if that's his name. So then top of the next page, you get the ordre mixte. The lines of infantry were deployed to protect the flanks with their musketry, so French tactics were called ordre mixte, the mixed order of column and line. I know, Brian, from what you said during the break, that you were working on that idea of the column. But this too goes back to an old regime theorist, and his name is giving there. My point is, run through this entire chapter. Whether the question is whether the question is tactics or weaponry or the organization of the army or this effort at ideological propaganda, run through this entire chapter and you will find a slew of issues that you could make central to your argument, asking with each one the question, if this is what you want to do, you run through the rest of the book too, in each case asking the question, what changed? To what extent was that change a development of something that had changed prior? And you can also raise the question, as the Napoleonic armies encountered other armies, did they change in response to what they saw in the Napoleonic army? And moreover, did the changes they undertook respond to impulses that existed in their military traditions before this whole period began? So there are all kinds of ways, you see, questions to ask. And I think, if warfare is to be your subject, that entire chapter gives you the material that you'll need to handle those questions. So having said that, what do you think of this? Did Napoleon represent a huge monumental change? Is he just a continuation of tendencies that existed beforehand, and you can well imagine anyone in his position would have extended anyway? What is Napoleon in regard to warfare? Yes, Brian.
What I took out of that, Napoleon with his levies, the men became cheaper. Before that, European had expensive armies, lots of maintained they'd maneuver, and they've got a better position than us. We're going to lose, so we surrendered. Shots didn't even have to fire.
All right.
Napoleon's like, I got a levy. We came upon like thousands of men dead at a location. Like, I can replace those in Paris in one night. I don't care.
Okay.
So he became more callous towards his men's lives.
Okay, callous. And in terms of strategy, what corresponds to callous? Pardon?
Shock. Throw your troops at them and break their line.
All right.
Doesn't matter how many.
Okay. So a tremendous offensive strategy that worked against this tendency toward wars of maneuver that you described. Yes, Austin?
Well, I was just going to say that question almost seems like an age-old question. I remember I wrote a paper in high school about was Alexander the Great really great? Like, you know, it's a pretty common
Yeah,
topic.
sure.
But really, I think what it comes down to, and what Amy said earlier, is the charisma of a leader. I mean, can go one way or the other. And in Napoleon, his cards just played right, and he was an opportunist, like you said.
Okay.
He took advantage of the advantages that he had, and I think he just, I mean, I think to an extent, luck did play a part in some of the events.
Yeah, okay. Yes, right.
I think a big part of Napoleon, like when you compare him to like Louis XVI, is like when Louis XVI was under rule, you had a lot of French soldiers defecting to the other army because there was no real loyalty among them.
Okay.
Once Napoleon is there was no talk of that. I mean, he had so much
Okay.
charisma that they all rallied around him.
Okay.
He was also a phenomenal general because he would ride in the front lines. He reminded me a lot when I was reading the book of kind of like the Desert Fox in World War II. Because like
Rommel, okay.
he like in the African front, because he rode the front lines and he saw the opportunities from right there.
Yeah,
So
okay.
he was an opportunist in that sense.
Okay, Joe, your hand had been up, and then Victor.
I'm pretty sure it was in here. It talked about that prior to Napoleon, borders and boundaries, they would change, but people didn't aggress so much across the boundaries. Napoleon's the first one who said, I'm going to take Europe, all of it.
Well, Napoleon could defend himself and say, well, that logic worked until the borders of Poland came into question. I mean, Napoleon could say, I'm just drawing the proper conclusions from the world in which I live. He could say that. I mean, certainly, if you want to keep your focus on Germany, there was nothing like it. Nothing. No one had ever redrawn the map since the Roman Empire that would compare with what Napoleon had in mind. That very much is true. But Napoleon could say, well, Germany's not the whole world either. Look at what others have done in other places.
So he ran through Spain, and
Yeah.
I'm sure Portugal was on his mind.
Yes, it was, because Portugal was, of course, using its coastline to violate the continental system.
He had designs on ruling from Moscow to the Atlantic Ocean.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, he certainly was a great adherent of the idea of satellite states. I mean, the Grand Duchy of Warsaw was a satellite state. The Duchy of Baden, a satellite state. But the Kingdom of Bavaria, a satellite state. He certainly believed in that. Saxony. Yes, Victor.
Brilliant tactician, new technology in artillery. He was able to use the new technologies to really strike some terror that
Okay.
had been thrown into people in
Okay.
that
Okay. Now, yes.
I was also going to say, like, not only did he use new technology and introduce some new ideas, new thinking, new customs, but he also was able to take the good things that he saw in the old regime and use them effectively
Okay.
as well.
All right.
Like, I would say that he crafted something out of both old and new.
Okay. I mean that's an interesting position too, to try to establish a balance between the extent to which Napoleon simply reached into the storehouse of old ideas and then developed them in his own way, and the extent to which there is real innovation here. And if so, where does the innovation come from? Yes.
To tie two together, did he see himself in the mold of Alexander the Great?
I don't know that he saw himself in the mold of Alexander the Great. I'm not sure about that.
We kind of talked about that in my art history class.
Okay, let's hear.
And there's a lot of paintings that Napoleon commissioned that were supposed to depict him kind of like Alexander the Great. And even on the Arc de Triomphe, he has like the similar hairstyle,
Yeah.
the same posture, and it's all on purpose
Mhm.
because he wanted to show himself as the new Alexander the Great.
Okay. Well, he certainly looked back to Rome.
Yeah.
I mean, that great painting by Jacques-Louis David, where Napoleon is rearing up on horseback. He's going where Hannibal went. He's going where Caesar went. I mean, he certainly saw himself in grand terms there. Grand terms. And of course, this was good for propaganda. That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah. Of course, he lost. I mean, we're all explaining his victories. And it didn't end well for him. He was in exile, and then, of course, he returned for the 100 days, then the Battle of Waterloo, then the final exile, St. Helena, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Didn't want that to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing that always puzzled me is how they were so, after killing the king, they were so ready to make him an emperor so soon. It just amazed me. You know, hey, we give up one authority figure now. I just need another daddy. It's just amazing.
Well, but I think part of that, and I don't know if this is just some like myth that's been passed down to make George Washington look like an idol or not, but in, you know, elementary school or whatever, you know, you always heard that they gave Washington his sword and asked him to become the new king of, you know, of the new colonies. And I think it's just almost one of those things where people like,
I wonder if that's true.
Breaking tradition, and I don't think they were 100% used to what they had already established through the revolution. Like, they saw the horrible happenings, they saw everything happening, and then when they saw Napoleon gain the land that he gained, then they said, well, you know, maybe only kings can do that. Maybe only emperors can do that, because they didn't see that physical growth during the period of the revolution. So maybe they were only thinking about land and the territory.
Pardon?
Aspect.
He took over in a coup. That was the coup of 1799. He became first consul. He then outstripped the other consuls in authority. And 1801, he became consul for life, and he turned to the people for a referendum of that, towards that. And then 1804, emperor, and he turned to the people for a referendum of that. So the role of the people then is rather murky, because they affirmed dramatic action. Hitler did that often in his empire.
Yeah.
He would turn to the people to affirm dramatic action, but not really to canvass the popular view, the popular opinion. And to begin with, I mean, Napoleon is really dragged in by other politicians who simply want to harness his popularity for their power. At the end of 5 years, let's face it, after the Jacobins fell in 1794, the Directory simply failed to establish any loyalty that you would match with the loyalty that the Jacobins had when the Jacobins were at their apex. Your hand had been up, Brian.
I had a history professor, Foster, who explained it. I mean, the U.S. was set up as a dual form of government. And then even in the federal government, you're supposed to have executive, legislative. But whenever something goes wrong, people won't look to one person to solve it. You don't go into, like, where there's a problem, I want to talk to your manager. You don't say, I want to go talk to a council. You want one person to be held accountable. When that one person is held accountable, they tend to collect more and more power to deal with the problems that come up. You have a problem in the United States, you have a recession, you have a major national disaster. You're not going to wait for Congress to get together and solve it. You want one person to solve it.
It would be interesting to test that.
An energy czar.
It would be interesting to test that, but you know, in the example I would put as a possible counterexample will surprise you, and that would be Stalin. Now, why do I say Stalin? Because his reputation is that, of course, of a horrific dictator, which I think he became. But I do believe that in the 1930s, Russians were still a bit confused about who was in charge, and did not necessarily identify Stalin, who was, of course, General Secretary of the Communist Party, did not necessarily identify him as the linchpin that, in fact, he was becoming. And Russian soldiers in battle sometimes, or in oral histories years later, will go a little bit blank on what Stalin meant to them at the time, but they will mention someone else, some other leader. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, I think, I think the United States is a counter. People do, well, is an example in your in your case, for your case, and that is that people do look to the president as the center. They do. No doubt historians try to disabuse people of that view to some extent by pointing to other centers of power that are not put in evidence by the media to that degree. But yeah, I mean, Napoleon certainly, I mean, he certainly fell into it, but having fallen into it, well, he was the opportunist. You know, we come back to the word. So my point about the chapter that I drew your attention to, if you're just at a loss for ideas, rifle that chapter for ideas, because it gives you what was remarkable about Napoleon in his day, or even before in the revolutionary era of revolutionary wars, but it also gives you this idea that some of it had precedent of one kind or another beforehand. And in other armies, there was a response to Napoleon, but some of that had precedent in their tradition beforehand. Yes?
Would it be safe to say that at the time, between Russia, Prussia, and Napoleon's France, you had three major countries that were just almost completely militarized?
Yes. Yes. It would be safe to say that. They are three different countries.
Right.
France has, I mean, whatever we say about the ideological fervor of the typical French soldier, whatever we say about that, the French soldier was certainly energized in the campaign. Some combination of military discipline and propaganda.
What was interesting was, I think it was in some of the German republics, he talked about how when people would be conscripted into the military, the town would have a wake and basically count them dead.
It was Russia. Yeah,
Oh, that was
it
in
was Russia. Yeah, because their service was so arduous and extended over such a period of time that the presumption was, that one we will never see again. Now, that's actually a good segue into the transition into the point I wanted to raise here. What about the, and I'd like to shift the attention from France to elsewhere in Europe. What about the idea that elsewhere in Europe, this can be called a people's war? In, for example, the German states. Does your author represent this as a people's war, as opposed to the war that's clearly in the hands and at the initiative of rulers? And if it is a people's war, then is there some common idea that animates the people at large? Yes?
This was central to the argument against nationalism.
Okay.
And the idea that people fought for their town or their community or whatever locale they identified themselves with.
Yeah.
That's what was important to them. They didn't necessarily
Okay.
fight for France.
But as Saxons and Bavarians, for this final, this war of the nations, as it is called, Leipzig, the Battle of Leipzig in October of 1813, I mean, there's no end of patriotic attention to the Battle of Leipzig in 1813. Ever since, well, that is until 1945, it was common to instruct, you say the way Americans learn about George Washington in school. Well, it was common to instruct German students that the Battle of Leipzig was the expression of a huge national uprising. And of course it involved many German troops from many German states. What does your author say about that thesis of a common national uprising? Yeah.
I mean, he talks about that it did evoke some powerful expressions of political loyalties. I'm actually looking at page 111.
Okay.
But it was not democratic rights-based nationalism, not nationalism in the way that it would come to be.
Yeah.
It was a different kind of expression of like the loyalty to the fatherland
Okay.
and reaction to an invading force. And
Okay.
so it was much less defined than you
Okay.
would call nationalism.
So clear Saxony of the occupation army, clear Bavaria of the occupation army. I suppose if 1813 is 1813 is a national moment in a literary sense, in the sense that lots of books were written about it. Lots of songs were composed about it, and so forth. So it certainly left a legacy as a legend of great national unity. But it's not clear that many soldiers on the ground thought in those terms. Yes?
Especially since it said, like, if you look on page 69, 2/3 of his troops came from outside of France, and after 1812, when the empire unraveled, those other states, they quit sending troops. There wasn't that.
Okay.
You're not forcing us anymore. We're not loyal. People don't feel like they're just going to volunteer since you're not forcing it. And
Okay.
France had to carry more and
I
more
mean,
of the load themselves.
certainly if there was ever any desire on the part of Germans or Italians or Poles to fight in the French army, that idea quite evaporated by 1812, 1813, 1814. As national armies formed for national liberation, the question is whether the leadership thought in terms of the nation, or whether the ordinary soldier did. That's the question. If I were to tell you that I could direct you to authors, let's say, who wrote in 1813, who emphasized national themes, who emphasized that Germany was a nation and that it had suffered foreign conquest and that this was an act of national liberation. If I would direct you to authors like that, and you would see at the same time Rapport's caution about that, what would you think that how would you then interpret what those authors wrote? Because it would not be hard for me to draw attention to national authors who stressed national German patriotism. Yes? Okay, propagandists. You're right. Yes? Okay. A movement among educated people. And there's a famous professor, for example, Fichte, who gave lectures at the University of Berlin in 1806. Right at the moment where, the Prussian army falls to defeat at Jena, the Battle of Jena, 1806. And people for years after would read these lectures, these Reden an die deutsche Nation, these lectures to the German nation, and say, there, you see, a philosopher was giving lectures on this. Well, it didn't have much resonance outside of the lecture hall, but it makes great reading. And of course, you get all of these songs and poems and so forth about Die Wacht am Rhein, the watch on the Rhine, and Germans have always stood steadfast on the Rhine to defend it against French incursions. Well, that's nonsense. And it's not clear that many Germans in 1813 even thought of it in those terms. Sure, the Prussian king who's at the head of this movement can emphasize this is German liberation, meaning that if you are in Saxony, we will clear the French from Saxony. If you are in Bavaria, we will clear the French from Bavaria. Hanover, Frankfurt, Hamburg, wherever, we will clear the French. But national uprising, that's something different. By the way, your author sets aside Russia as a special case. Why so? What does the Russian army consist of?
Essentially, they're serfs forced into
All right.
conscription.
Right. And why don't their generals propagate ideas of Russian nationhood among them?
If I remember right, he mentions that the king is to free the serfs and give them the ability to be essentially nationalists. The nobles will resent him.
Yes.
But if he doesn't, the serfs won't serve in the same kind of way.
Okay.
It's back and forth.
Okay. The emperor, in this case Alexander I, is indeed in quite a quandary. He's well known as a liberal. He's well known as an admirer of Napoleon, even if he engages Napoleon in warfare, and he feels forced to throughout this period. But, you liberate the serfs, and your nobility rises in rebellion against you. you create a political system in which power is transferred to the nobility, the only ones who can read, for example. And what do they use their authority for? Why, to maintain serfdom. So the serfs are not liberated in Russia until after the Crimean War, 50 years later, under Alexander II. Okay. But of course, nationalistic propaganda among a serf army, that sounds like a disaster. I was interested in this book how many of them deserted rather than go back to Russia when they were in Germany. And I've never seen a study of that, they'd have to live in some kind of bandit mode or something like that, but must have, to avoid serfdom. It's an interesting dimension of the story. But no, the idea of the People's War, I think, runs against the collapses with regard to Russia for obvious reasons. Okay. Can you do this paper? Can you do this paper? Yeah? You're getting ideas. I mean, huh? Pardon? It's only 3 to 4 pages. That's right. I mean, you're not being called upon to run to the library and read 50 or 60 books between now and next week. And I think you have the basic. Dune, do you have an idea what you're going to write about? Have you already fleshed that out a little bit in your thinking?
I'm kind of just trying to still get an idea of what I really found what I thought was the most significant.
Okay. To head for the most significant. Okay. How about you, Andrea? Do you have an idea of what you might write about? Yeah. You already wrote it. Okay. Okay, yeah, right. But it was no doubt the most impressive of all, right? Okay, good. Okay. How about you, Fallon? Have you gotten some ideas about what are you going to focus upon, do you think?
I think that stayed the same as that France wanted to get revenge on Britain.
That France wanted to, I didn't hear?
They kind of wanted to get revenge on Britain, like they constantly wanted to.
Okay. Yeah, so there's your continuity, right? Okay, yes.
For me, what's really interesting is how the views of the people changed, their the motivations for battling, and also the idea of them unifying. How that changed over the course of time.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I guess the skeptic always says, "Oh, people are people are people. Nothing ever changes under the sun." But I mean, look at this period when you can at least begin to raise the question whether ordinary people think of themselves as a nation, and that changes. There was a hand here. Whose was it? Okay, Amy.
I was just going to say along those lines, I think I'm going to kind of focus on identity and how the concept of war was a catalyst for thinking about identity.
Okay.
On many levels, French and otherwise.
French and elsewhere. Okay, good. Yes.
Yeah, that self-perception was not only a change in the French people, but everyone who came under the influence of the
Right. And it may delay in a country like Germany or Italy, but the 19th century does not come to an end before strong national movements develop in both. And, one would say also democratic movements in both. And the French really bring that along. Okay. So, I'd like to call things to a halt today, but I have a form that I would like you to fill, a questionnaire that I would like you to answer. In fact, this has nothing to do with a faculty, or did I bring it? Yes, I did. This has nothing to do with evaluation of me or evaluation of Andrea. Now, you've got, by the way, you have Andrea's information about how to get in touch with her, right? Okay, because she's ready to go. a number of departments are talking about creating a master's degree in humanities, which would be some kind of degree that joins, let's say, the discipline of history with other disciplines like art history, philosophy, literature, languages and cultures. And the question is whether, I think what they're trying to figure out is how much basic interest there is in that. Do you know that we have a very active master's degree in history? Did you know that? Do we have that? We do. In fact, I met my seminar last night. There are 17 of them, which students for a graduate seminar is huge. So that exists. This would be in addition to that. But there'd be some overlap. I mean, no doubt to some extent people would take, are these things still, yeah, there we go. To some extent I think people could join the master's degree and take an occasional history seminar, could be in the history program and take an occasional seminar in this if it comes into existence. And people have talked about this for years and years. And the question is anyone interested? Yes? Okay. All right. So this is honest, right? We're not going to have any ballot stuffing here.
So I shouldn't fill it out.
Probably not. Probably not. They're going to, I think, collate these as a whole, not class by class.
Question 3.
Uh-oh. I won't know.
Is that supposed to read if you respond yes to 2?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes to 2.
Yes, I think so. I had not read this beforehand, so I'm not sure. But yeah, if you have already filled it out, you're free to go when you've filled this out. I'll turn this in and we'll see what happens. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I think I'm going to leave a little bit early.
Oh. Well, okay. Well, thank you for telling me, and good luck with that.
I can't remember what time it is. It's in Monument.
Oh, yeah, so you'll have a drive. Well, good luck with
I
it.
don't know. We'll see. I doubt I get chosen because I have.
I would love to be in a trial. Jury duty would be boring. Trial would be